Let's do that. Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a Red Pill Religion late night podcast. We were hanging out in the Discord server chat, and the conversation was getting interesting. So I thought, why don't we take this energy and just put it into an impromptu live stream and see if people enjoy the conversation? Because one of the things that's fascinating to me is that I'm going to be 53 this year. And I've seen a lot, and I've made a transition. I've seen so many things happen in my lifetime, and I've traveled around the country a lot and known a lot of people from all over the place and done a lot of crazy things, actually. And so I come at this certain age to perceive certain things, and you always get that thing going in your head where it's like, oh, you're just old and whatever. And then I was just talking to Eric here. Eric's 25, and he's not really coming at this from a Christian perspective. Although I guess you have really recently come back to Christ, right? That was still a struggle for you there, or?
Yeah, a little bit. Although
Right.
I will say, spiritually, he does make the most sense to me.
Okay.
So, progress.
Progress. That's fine. That's fine. We ain't running a ministry. I tell that people all the fucking time. They don't believe me. Anyway, I'm glad your spiritual journey is going somewhere. So this is definitely. I would say that's a more positive direction than some other things that are out there. But yeah, we were just talking, and one of the things I mentioned is that something that's out there is that. There is what you can see is that economically, what we're seeing now in secular social justice, in globalism, in what used to be communism, is actually a complete inversion of Christian values. I mean, like literally take these values, turn them completely upside down, and that gets you the current secular thinking. And the grand irony is that the term social justice actually comes out of Christians. It specifically does come out of a papal encyclical you can look up called Rerum Novarum in the 1800s, and it was the papal response to both robber baron capitalism and to Marxism and socialism, very much against both. So it's kind of still relevant, actually, if you look at things. And it's had a bit. It was updated in the 1991 by Pope John Paul II. And that is still a relevant document too, if you read it. Like a lot of Catholic documents like that, you sneer and sniff and snarl at the Catholic Church and whatever you got to say about us. You read those documents; they're super hard to argue with. I mean, they are so. They just try reading Rerum Novarum. I'll find it for people to see, I guess. Rerum Novarum. And yeah, here it is from Pope Leo the 13th. This is relevant because this document, Rerum Novarum, formed the basis of something called Catholic social teaching, which was so powerful in its reasoning that quite a few Protestant denominations throughout the 20th century adopted it pretty much whole cloth or with only minor variations. And some places just came to be known as Christian social teachings, especially because, some Protestants don't like whatever. And it is very much based on the idea that racism is wrong and that thinking men or women are inferior is wrong, and that economically we absolutely have an obligation to help the poor. But it describes a proper moral order of that, which essentially is an inversion of most globalist principles. You start with literally the social justice starts because social justice was a Christian term. The globalists just hijacked it. Literally, the term social justice came out of this Christian social teaching, which is that we're all the inheritors of injustice, and we all have injustices we commit. And some of us will be more fortunate in life, even though we don't particularly deserve to be more fortunate. See, this is where the libertarians and certain conservatives arch their backs and say, I worked hard for everything I had. Don't tell me I blah, blah. Yeah, that's pride talking, because fortune played a part. God's blessings played a part in anybody who was successful. Period. You didn't get struck down by cancer. You didn't get struck down by crippling injury. You didn't wind up with, a child that you had to take care of, that you didn't see coming. Any of or simply put, you got backstabbed or destroyed. The world is full of men. No matter how hard you work to get however much you have, the world is full of men or women who worked as hard or harder and just wound up planting their faces in the dirt. Or suffering some other injustice. Therefore, it's on you, if you have surplus that you don't need, that you give it to people who need it. But it goes in a specific order, which is that your moral obligation, first and foremost, is to be able to take care of yourself, because if you cannot be self-sufficient, you cannot rightly help anybody else in the long run. Now, if you can't be self-sufficient and you need some charity, fine. But, hopefully this is where it goes from there, because once you are self-sufficient, which is your moral obligation, you should be self-sufficient. Nobody should have to support you. And then from there, your obligation is to help your immediate family members. And then from there, your obligation is to help your extended family and your local community, and people in your local parish or your local church. And then from there, if you've got let's say you've got a charitable need that you can't make made through all that big of a network, then maybe you have to go up to the level of government, because it's some crisis like a flood or whatever. You just need to call in somebody. So by that measure, the whole globalist structure is top down from that. It completely inverts that and assumes the technocrats at the top know how to redistribute things justly. But they can't render what the Christians would call real social justice, because they're always doing these self-serving, technocratic, arbitrary choices in this top-down manner, and you can see that inversion of everything sane, not just in the economics, but if you look at what the people who've been ruling us the last few decades. Maybe longer than that, it's pretty clear there's an agenda to engineer our destruction, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're 25 years old, and I hear you talking, and it's like, man, I've only come to these revelations and these realizations in the last 5-10 years. It's taken me a long time. You're 25 and you've already seen it, so I know I'm not crazy.
Yeah, I see it plain as day, and I have since I was probably, put it this way, I was starting to pick up on this whole conspiracy to break up and destroy the family and family values, of course, along with it. Rather young, I was probably around 7 or 8 when and I'm speaking from personal experience here, I started to notice that compared to the other kids I was growing up with, certainly not all of them, but some of them, I did not have the most stable or loving in environment in terms of the family I was born to, and growing up in, and I couldn't really piece everything together as intricately as I can now back then. But I knew even as a child something's wrong here. This is this is not the way it's supposed to be. And as I got older, in my teen years, that's when I started to see that this was a bigger problem than what I originally thought. You see, at first I was like, oh, this is probably a relatively small social issue that only affects maybe the poor, maybe the working class to an extent. I didn't really think it was as widespread as it is. And into early adulthood, it just like something clicked, right? Because that's when I started figuring things out. Like, really began to put the world in perspective. I discovered that our media had been hijacked by corporations, by the CIA. People can go ahead and look up and research Operation Mockingbird if they want for confirmation of this. And I seen just how politically motivated things really were. And I've summed things up thus far as this. I think, well, no, I know we're experiencing pretty much an epidemic of broken and dysfunctional homes and families in America, and in the world in general. It's spreading very rapidly. Cultural engineering via the media and public schooling is to blame, really, because those are the mechanisms that the elite are using to propagate this stuff. It's very evil, maniacal stuff. See, because the plan is, if you break up the family unit, right, and that's one of the most basic and primitive forms of healthy human development, and you pretty much have a bunch of psychologically and emotionally broken and disturbed and damaged people running around, subconsciously looking for a sort of benevolent authority figure, father figure, mother figure, etc., to now fill the void in their heart where that strong, sturdy sense of family and community should have been, right? And that's where the state, that's where the government comes in to capitalize on that by attempting to act or pretend to be, the replacement for those basic needs and desires, thus leading to that person or that group of people developing complete and total dependency on the state. You see, that's just the natural progression of things. You destroy the family, you destroy that genuine sense of community, you rip people away from traditional values, whether they're religiously motivated or otherwise, and that's, they're easy pickings at that point, right? Because again, that's where the government steps in and says, "That's okay, kids. We are the ones who purposely created these conditions, right? That put you in the very harmful and negative positions that you're in now. But we'll come and we'll fill that void. We'll quote unquote fix that problem that we made. We'll be your daddy. We'll be your mommy. We'll be your family. We'll be your community." And that's a very dangerous, very, very dangerous ideology. And unfortunately, a lot of people
it's already a done deal
for it. Yes. Yes. That's a very gruesome and real reality for a lot of people. That's pretty much what it is. Take the recent government shutdown, for example. Look at how many people are up in arms about that, because of just how dependent they are on the state financially and socially and all this. And it's so sad to see that's the state of affairs in this country. I don't want to rant, though. I'm ranting now, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, well, I pulled this off of your own Facebook wall. farce book. I keep feeling guilty for being on it, but it's my only connection to a lot of people. Um, this you posted this from this book that you found. I have not read this book. I think maybe I've heard of this book or live books like this book, but it's when was it published?
I think if you scroll to the top, I think it was 1989. Was it? I believe it was 89, if I'm not mistaken.
And you know what? I remember completely laughing at people talking about this. Literally, I would mock them. Literally, I got sucked into the whole skeptic thing early on by Penn Jillette. I was a computer nerd in the '80s, and that's just kind of where it started. And Penn Jillette was already pushing his atheist shit on us back then, and I was sucking it up. I loved it. I thought he was something other than an evil agent of the New World Order, but in fact, that's what I think he is now. Because I would laugh at people who talk like this. But listen to this: the New World Order will include changes in the family. This was written in the late '80s, and by the way, people laughed at this if you talked about it. Said the family, homosexual marriages will be legalized. Parents will not be allowed to raise their children. The state will. All women will be employed by the state and not allowed to be homemakers. Divorce will become exceedingly easy, and monogamous marriage will be slowly phased out. The workplace, the government will become the owner of all the factors of production. The private ownership of property will be outlawed. Religion will be outlawed, and believers will be either eliminated or imprisoned. There will be a new religion, the worship of man in his mind. All will believe in the new religion. The only part there that I think can be quibbled with, but I truly believe it's just a quibble, is that all women will be employed by the state and not allowed to be homemakers. And not quite, but really pretty close, because the state has engineered conditions where women have to go and work, whether they want to or not.
That's right.
And they are in workplaces that are heavily regulated by the state and that are otherwise not always, but usually owned by transnational corporate entities, or at least national level corporate entities.
Right.
We are ruled by a corporatocracy that is functionally rules very similarly in a lot of ways to the way the Communist Party operates.
You see how in when it comes the family section there, you see how the plan, the idea there is to strip the parents and just people in general away from their natural roles as either males or females. You see that, right? You see how and they put as much distance between the child and the parents as possible so that the state can swoop in and be the parents for them. I think that's so evil and so sinister.
Yeah. Well, and there's the thing that wait.
Because this leads to all sorts of things like, oh my goodness, the corruption and tyranny of CPS, for example.
Here's the thing: most Americans who have not run into it don't know it, but I do. When I did men's rights, which you see me in that movie, The Red Pill, with those filthy, discussing Luciferians. Some of them, it turns out, are in that movie, The Red Pill. But when I was doing my men's rights work, I saw all the abuses of family court and all the abuses of the other civil court systems against men, and saw all the use of criminal courts against men. And it's mostly targeting men, and for good reason, by the way. And they laugh at it and laugh at you and call you paranoid, but no, they're targeting men on purpose. They want to take fathers away from children.
Yes.
They want to take our most creative and industrious minds and crush them. Mm-hmm. I truly believe this is the agenda. You get the children fatherless, and already you're in trouble.
Oh yeah,
and that's like a nuclear bomb that's still slowly exploding. The number of fatherless young people in this country continues to rise, and fatherless children are a mess. Right. I know I was functionally one. I was basically one. I had just most fucked up father relationship and most fucked up mother relationship you can imagine. Pretty much. There's been worse. Like I was never physically, burned with a iron or something, but just about anything else you could imagine. It was pretty bad.
Yep.
And I'm in my 50s, and I see how that fucked my life up. and just made things confusing and painful and difficult for me constantly. But I watched as slowly more and more young people were struggling with the same issues, and it's like, oh man, I've only made it to the 50s and I've only managed to mature my way out of, maybe 70% of it.
Right.
Loss of the family, loss of the father, especially loss of the family, is like severing a limb. It is permanent psychic damage.
Yeah.
And we've done that to a whole generation.
Yep, and that's entirely on purpose. If a child does not have its father, if a child does not have its mother, if it doesn't have both of their parents in their lives, and it's not raised in that sort of environment where the masculine and feminine energy isn't balanced, that child's going to be, like you said, really fucked up. And to make matters even worse, that really fucked up child, they send them off to public school, and damn, that's where the indoctrination begins like mad, because I mean that's where they really stifle.
And it starts, by the way, when we start jamming Ritalin down little boys' throats for being
yeah,
which, by the way, I've been complaining about for about 20 years, and now I get to watch them walk around as full-on adults. Like, look, I call Jimmy Medicare Ritalin Jim, because he is just so obvious a Ritalin kid. It's just it's hysterical, right? And holy shit, this whole thing. I remember 20 years ago saying, yeah, people are going to really have a hard time. They're going to have to deal with these problems in 20 years if they don't do something. I'm like, nothing got done.
And look at the state of affairs now because nothing was done. It's so terrible. But when they get shipped off to these indoctrination centers, because that's what they are really, these people stifle and destroy and just murder free and critical thinking and imagination and creativity in the child. They clip their wings, so to speak. And then, if the kid shows signs of, I don't know, just having a lot of energy, maybe they're not able to sit still all the time, maybe, they're daydreaming a lot, or, whatever it is, they're like, oh, there's something wrong with this kid. We need to pump him or her full of drugs and completely fucking zombify them, to the point where, like, they're just they look like freaking, like they're going through withdrawals or something, like some heroin addict would be going through, and they're just kids. They're like between 5 and 10 or whatever. It's like, oh my goodness, what are we doing to these new generations? It's terrible. We're completely destroying any hope of a brighter future for at least the kids, and that truly saddens me. Yeah.
I just got trolled, so I'm gonna have to answer this troll. Somebody's troll says, "Why do you support sodomite Milo?" That's a little bit worse than Ritalin. I just want to say first, define support. I recognize a fallen man and a sinner. Wait, so let me essentially. I recognize in Milo Yiannopoulos a fallen man and a sinner. What are you? But the same. Look to your own salvation first, motherfucker. Get off my channel if that's how you're going to talk about Milo or anybody else.
Yeah.
You want to talk about what the issue is with sodomy? Okay, I'll go there. I don't like the term sodomy because we've almost been conditioned to hate it. Like to joke at the word sodomy, but I truly believe an entire culture has been seduced into Sodom. I may send this to Ted Schubat because I think he and I may have a bit of an argument, but maybe a fruitful one about this issue, because I think he's actually too hard on the gays. And it's not because I want to sneak it in. What I think really happened, and it's very much like what Milo said, that we were sold a lie starting in the 80s. I know, I was there. That's why I'm also reading this book, you know, looking at this book from the late 80s, and I'm like, I remember people talking like this and going, ha ha, you're crazy, and it describes reality completely. And by the way, yes, the Ritalin is more evil than the sodomy. There are things more evil than sodomy, and the Ritalin certainly is. Simply because you are taking a child. I mean, okay, if you count child sex, child rape as sodomy, fine, then no, it's not. But in terms of, you know, where it started, which is saying adults are going to have this privacy of their own home kind of thing, which is where it kind of started with the whole gay rights thing, that it was, you know, we're just super normal people who have this private habit, and we hope you'll accept us kind of thing and not persecute us. That's kind of what we were being sold on the gays in the 80s, and that's hard to argue with. Right? I mean, literally, even now as a Christian, if there was a couple of gay dudes next door, but, you know, they were totally super discreet about it, never put it in your face, and you didn't even know if they were like that, but they were just quiet and really nice people. Otherwise, no one would really care because we would consider it not our business. That's just kind of how it worked, and it's gone on from there. What has happened is an entire culture. I like this phrase. One of the other younger men who hangs out here calls it seduced into Sodom. And I think that's exactly what happened, because I was seduced into Sodom by child molesters. Right from your own. Yes, Ritalin is more evil than sodomy. Please quote that. Please send that to every trad Catholic. Please send it to every Protestant group you can think of. Send it to every anti-Catholic group you can think of. Send it to Ted Schubat. Send it to anybody who will hate me. Send it to Michael Voris. Quote it again from Max of Red Pill Religion. Ritalin is worse than sodomy.
Frame it and put it on the wall.
Sin. It's a whole fundamental level. It's more evil. And you're a fool if you can't see it.
Yeah, and on top of that, what you were just saying, even if Milo engages in that sort of activity, even from a Christian perspective, you're not supposed to hate people, period, right? It's right. Hate the sin, love the sinner.
And so maybe I should be working harder to love this motherfucker. But really, what the hell do you think you are? You're talking to a child sex abuse victim who's talking about some deep shit. Why don't you fuckers shut up?
Yeah,
and listen to what somebody's telling you. I'm going to tell you why the Ritalin is worse, because it is just like raping a child, but it's raping him in a way he may never ever recover from. Ritalin in children, especially in boys, is just about as bad as raping them. It might be worse, depending. And I'm talking to you as a sex abuse survivor, so if you're going to snarl and snark and mock me, fuck you again. You stupid trad, whatever you are. And by the way, Christians do swear, at least this one does. Fuck you one more time. I'm talking, I've spent years trying to help people recover from child sex abuse. I've had to recover from it myself. And I'm going to say it again. The Ritalin's worse. It destroys your brain. It fucks you up for life. That's what it's done to these boys. Millions of them. They were effectively raped chemically. In ways that you can recover from child sex abuse. Some of that Ritalin damage will never be fixed. It's like is sodomy worse than going around cutting off every boy's arm? Would you prefer the sodomy or cutting off every boy's left arm? If you say, well, no, obviously cut the left arm off, again, you've got a problem of your thinking. The bottom line is that we seduced an entire generation into what you call sodomy. That's what Milo is, and that's what I see in Milo every time I see him.
He was what they would call a victim of the times that he was living in.
I'm not saying, by the way, that means, you know, what he's doing is not a sin, because it is. It's undeniably that it is. But we do all sin. I will repeat that I am a fallen man and a sinner. Who are you? Just like to know that. Are you one of me? Are you one of those fallen men and sinners too? Okay. Milo admits he's got a problem. and he's not ready to address it. He's like a drunk who's having trouble quitting. And by the way, I've watched Addiction, and if you're one of those people who doesn't think addiction is real, well, you're an idiot. It is real, and it's devastating. People who are actually looking to get better are people you should be encouraging and supporting. That's just common sense. People who are struggling with something, and they're even saying, I know it's wrong, I'm struggling. I believe they deserve coaching and help and encouragement, not this constant condemnation. Who the hell are you? Cast the first stone. He was without saying cast the first stone. I even think that part where Ted Schubat likes to quote St. Paul, claiming, saying, yes, sodomy is worthy of death. If you would just realize that the very next line in the chapter numbers are not in the original. If you just very the next line, he condemned everybody else, everybody who was talking about killing the sodomites, say, but you all deserve death too, because you're all disgusting and you do these things. And what he meant by these things was any kind of sexual deviance, because they had no specific concept of gay. So if you're an adulterer, you're as much a sodomite as Milo. If you like masturbating to porn, you're as much of a sodomite as Milo. Actually, let me say that again, because I know a lot of young Christian men have a problem with this one. If you masturbate to porn, you are a sodomite. Now, unless we got that straight, hell, if you just masturbate to the underwear catalog or to the Songs of Solomon, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be blasphemous, but really, you're a sodomite if you whack off. You're a sodomite if you just like having anal sex with your wife. So then when Paul was saying, you who do these things are worthy of death, and in the very next line says, he says men who have sex with men are worthy of death, but you who do these things also are worthy of death. He was pretty much indicting everybody in the crowd. And just like Jesus at the well, who, when he said, he who is without sin cast of her stone, I see that's all that Paul was saying there. We have had a whole generation, boys especially, with drugs get jammed down their throats, destroying their brains at a very early age, being taught from before puberty all these things about sex that are wrong, with no father or whatever to give them any advice, nobody to give them any sane functional advice. I mean, I have looked at a group called NoFap, and a whole lot of guys, like, whenever I bring it up, laugh at me. And just say I'm an old man. I've sat and looked at a lot of the NoFap material, and it is the NoFap movement was made up of young men who want to stop masturbating, and they're not even religious. It was started by teen-aged young men. I think the first kid who got started, he was like 16, 17. And he had all kinds of health and mental health and other issues. And he was digging through obscure books and stuff like that, science texts that, get buried, and determined that very possibly the reason he was depressed and had a whole bunch of other psychological, physical, and social problems was because he was masturbating 3 or 4 times a day, which everybody had told him was completely normal and healthy and to be encouraged. And then he tried quitting. And he did indeed successfully quit. For what? For I don't remember, because this is what the common thing is. He discovered what now quite a few other young men have discovered, which is that you completely give up the porn and you completely give up the masturbation. You get physically healthier. You tend to be calmer. You tend to be less depressed. Women, not less secure around women. You tend to be able to control your urges in general better. Your mood lifts, and you get more energy to do things throughout the day and throughout the night. And this is now being reported by thousands and thousands and thousands of these guys who adopted NoFap. But what's also interesting is virtually all of them, report, look, they were taught since before they had their first pubic hair that masturbation was healthy and normal, and that you should do that. And then they'll look what's out there. And these guys they're not even religious, and they're discovering they have to quit. And then they're finding that they can't. That literally they can't. That they all fall, like the drop-off rate of guys who try to stop masturbating is something like 99% within the first month, and usually within the first week, sometimes within the first few days. Now, these men are all sodomites. Let me repeat that all these men who are having trouble stopping masturbating are sodomites. Are you going to condemn them too? Because I think the odds statistically of you being one of them, even though you're a Christian, are pretty high. Because just my informal survey of Christians I know, Christian men I know who've struggled with it. So this whole notion that we have to auto-condemn and mistreat the sodomite, well, first look to your own house, please. Second, let's talk seriously again what happened to Milo. I was caught up by sex predators when I was a young teen boy. I mean, I had a few weird experiences I won't even go into pre-puberty because I simply don't want to talk about it. It's not that bad. It's not that good either. But I mean, starting after puberty, you know, public school teacher, wife a cop, buddies in the Chicago Transit Authority. It was all early 80s. I mean, they were a pedo ring running out of the entirely secular system, by the way. And when you kind of get into that culture, which they did seduce me into, although part of me rebelled because I got out real fast. I managed to jack myself out of there and escape. Well, I went from the hands of one really bad set of sex predators to a somewhat better, less awful sex predator. I've had a really interesting life. You get seduced into Sodom. I'm sorry, it happens. And when you, I mean, it's once you've witnessed this, the fact that there are whole places where it's just like everybody's doing this and you don't know different, you got a whole nother ball game here, because then there are the people who try to quit and they can't. Now, I think actually Milo probably should be getting old. I mean, from my perspective, as long as he's continually moving in the right direction, I can only applaud him. And realize, you know, what do you want from a guy who keeps saying over and over again, I know it's wrong and it's disgusting and it should be kept in private? He's just recently written a whole book about how basically gays, you all need to go back in the closet. What more do you want from the man except that he become a perfect saint for you now? Are you one yet? So anyway, that guy, I didn't actually want to go into all that because I was more interested in talking about the what's been done to us, which is that we've damaged a generation of young people on purpose, and we've especially targeted the boys. Have no mistake about it. I mean, we targeted it by making the girls more privileged than the boys, which is what we did actually do. You know, male privilege was a way of giving women more privilege. The whole male privilege myth. So we pick on the boys from the very, very early age and favor the girls. We've taken away most pro-male entertainment too. That's one of the reasons anime is popular. Just because the Japanese were making something that's a little more traditional than anything than most Americans are making these days. But so we give them no positive role models. We take away their fathers in about half the cases now, and put them through a secular indoctrination system where they are taught something called science that is not really science, where they are taught something called history that is often fake, phony, completely bogus history. Where they're indoctrinated against religion, where they are indoctrinated against hating maleness in general, and then they go out into a corporate workforce and they're lost. It's a completely lost generation. They used to call Generation X the lost generation. Millennial generation is lost. They have no families. This means, I mean, if they have family, they have a broken one or a very distant one. Because even if some families are staying together, but it's like this one lives 100 miles from that one, and that one over there lives 3 states over, and everybody communicates long distance. But when shit hits the fan, which it's going to sooner or later, people find themselves desperate and alone with no family to fall back on. Nobody fall back on except charity. And the charity's work is going to be what? Either the church or the state. And what is the state working overtime to do but to destroy the church?
Right. This is such a commonplace issue for many people I know my age or younger. So I can affirm that this is all true. They really don't have a stable and structured family to fall back on for literally anything. I mean, even for like simple life advice, they really, they don't have anyone else to go to other than other broken and non-functional people like themselves, and they're not going to get the best advice or help in general from them, right? Because they're pretty much at that point they're just seeking help from a mirror image of themselves. So this is a very real and very, very prominent issue in our society today, and it does. I feel like it doesn't get talked about nearly enough, as it should be.
Oh no! In fact, there's a lot of YouTube channels will tell you that like you can get demonetized or have other weird things happen to your videos if you do things like.
Oh yeah, but
things like word. So the word family is one of the offensive words.
Yeah, but oh yeah, all that will get taken down or censored. You'll get deplatformed on whether it's Facebook or YouTube or whatever. But if you advocate for the acceptance of pedophilia, for example, well, we're fine with keeping those videos and those blogs and those posts up. Sure, why not? Knock yourself out with with that shit, and it's it's just total degeneracy being favored over pretty much, I mean, just moral things. Just common sense, moral things, and that's pretty telling, I would say. It's very telling of the type of government we're living under, and the
perversion of the youth, the seduction of the innocent started, I believe, truly in the 60s. And a lot of people, one of the things that actually frightens me is that now boomers are the most unpopular generation. But, and this is something I wish I could talk to Devin Stack about sometime over at Black Pilled. But there's this tendency that a lot of people have had to be anti-boomer, and I almost think we need to get it out of the culture to a certain extent, or at least start pushing back a little bit, because because two things happened. One thing is that the boomers were like seduced into all this. They were sold this free love, new age stuff. That was sold to them 30 years before this book came out that we're talking about here. That would have been, or 20 years before. Well, really, it started more like 30 years before. But I mean, from to a certain extent, Elvis, but certainly the Beatles onward, we were more and more and more sold some actually really awesome music. I got to tell you, I like boomer music. I can't help it, But the boomers were sold this message hard, and it was all like it was all spontaneous. No, it wasn't. The LSD was introduced into the population as mind control experimentation. Television became more and more and more programming. I mean, really, television programming is programming you.
Yes, that
I was from the program generation, and I was a TV addict as a kid.
Oh yeah, I have not watched TV seriously in probably 10 years or even more.
Yeah,
the thing just sits in the corner of my room, and I'm looking at it now. It's drenched, just drowning in dust. Like I haven't touched it in so long. I mostly just read books, or I watch documentaries, or I talk to people of various different views on things. That's how I get my information, and how I form my thoughts and whatnot. Because you're right. The TV is, I mean, really, it's pretty much the
YouTube generation. The YouTube generation was similarly brainwashed.
Yeah,
and actually, the atheist project on the internet was a funded, coordinated project to indoctrinate millennial youth into atheism.
Yeah,
very clearly.
That that whole thing, that they poison the well everywhere they go.
Yes.
The internet, it was, by the way, the internet was born out of acid experimentation and other psychedelics. The concept, at least, the
And
concept.
we were sold this ludicrous lie that even I could tell. I used to be a techno utopianist atheist, total techno nerd, and a bit of a transhumanist. I really was. I didn't leave atheism until quite some time later. And then even some of these, after I left atheism, was still like a lot of these ideas still lingered in me for years. It was a slow process of unraveling things, and changing how I saw the world. But yeah, I forget what point I was about to make. Is that
I think you were mentioning YouTube and
yeah? Well, yeah, YouTube. No, I mean, literally, it was a planned program. That's what people like TJ and even Pendulette and all those were. That was YouTube programming, was programming atheism into young marginalized people, because actually kids in functional families don't spend that much time on the internet staring at YouTube videos. Who does? Fatherless kids from broken homes, kids with nowhere to go, hanging out online all the time.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I was for the longest time, and to a certain extent still am today, but I'm in a better place mentally and emotionally and spiritually, so I've grown since then. But I can certainly attest to that. Yeah, that was pretty much my life. That was like my entire teenage life into, for the most part, my early adult life as well. So I mean, the internet was just it's a safe haven to a lot of people. A lot of people who are, like we were just describing, just very broken and dysfunctional and lost individuals, and they gravitate toward the internet because, well, it's like breeding ground for like-minded people, so they feel welcomed. But actually, it's as much as it may seem like a sort of comfort to them, I hate to break it to them, and I'm speaking from experience, I was one of them. It's not actually. It's quite dangerous. I think it just feeds the addiction that is that brokenness inside. I think it is a way for younger people, especially, to sort of turn a blind eye to the issues that we're talking about going on in the real world today. It's their way of ignoring it and not paying attention to it. And even though they're victims of it, they're like, like, we don't want to deal with that. Well, if you don't want to deal with it, if you don't want to confront it, and realize that you have been affected by it, and that's what's damaging you, you're never going to be able to fix it. If you don't acknowledge a problem, and if you don't think the problem exists in the first place, well, you're screwed. If you don't think there's a problem, even though there's clearly a problem, that's the real problem.
It's mind-boggling to me how I can see now. Another book that I mean, you take your red pills where you can get them. And I know that the phrase is getting old cliched, but no, seriously, there's stuff to learn and stuff to learn. I used to not believe that American imperialism was a thing. I did not think American imperialism existed. I thought it was a left-wing lie. I really did. I wasn't crazy. The sources I was watching made me believe that. And the sources I trusted made me believe that.
Right.
I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't stupid.
My folks, they still think American imperialism is not a thing. They still think that doesn't exist, in their late 50s, early 60s. So, and most people, I think, even though, a lot of people are sort of waking up to it, but very slowly, very gradually. But we still have a lot of people, like you said, that really they don't see it.
You still can't see it.
If you bring it to their attention, you're like, hey, we have military bases, and just, we're occupying 150 plus countries all over the world still. And we're still in all these wars, all these perpetual wars. We're still bombing the ever-living shit out of all these various Middle Eastern countries and displacing and murdering so many people there. And we're pretty much going there and setting up shop by force, right, via militaristic means. They will look at you like you have three heads when you start talking about that stuff to them, because they think it's a conspiracy theory, really. Like, that's, if you're like, hey, the American government is pretty much a global totalitarian regime at this point, they'll be like, okay, well, who'd you hear that from? Alex Jones, and then laugh in your face and tell you to go away. And they'll dismiss you just like that.
Yep, which is programmed indoctrination of its own. It really is, although it's because you're taught not to think for yourself, and that you're stupid if you think for yourself, and that you're crazy and dangerous if you think for yourself. I want to recommend a book that's as mainstream as you can get on this, too. You look for a guy named John Perkins, Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. This is as mainstream a source as you can get. This guy, actually, his book was published by Barrett Kohler, perfectly respectable publication. This is the latest version. I have it on my Kindle here. The new Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Confessions of an Economic Hitman was put out in the early 2000s and was a New York Times bestseller and was written up favorably in things like Wall Street Journal and stuff like that. I mean, it had complete respectability in the mainstream, and then it was kind of made to disappear. Nobody talks about this book as much anymore. This man was an economic hitman, and what that really meant was, and you see these things that he did, because he went in to destroy countries, and he was like the first guy who went in to destroy your country. And by the way, if you ever want to jump in, you can feel free at this point, Albrecht, but I don't think he ever went to the Philippines, but when I'm reading this, I'm like, oh yeah, I know now what happened to the Philippines, and I know what happened to South Korea, and I know what happened to Panama, and I know what happened to Iran, and I know what happened to Indonesia. I know it's astounding reading this book, because no, really, we go in and we destroy countries.
Yep. Yep, we destroy countries, we destabilize their system of government, their way. We just completely do away with their way of life, and we pretty much impose. I was going to say our way of life, but it's not really our. It's more like the government's forcefully prescribed way of life for us. We bring that to them, and when we impose that on them, and then we wonder why we have so many enemies and why so many people hate us. And there you go. There's probably right there the biggest reason for that.
And one of the things is that Americans, to a certain extent, people in other countries can see a lot of this more clearly than we can, because of course within America we are brainwashed to not see these things. Right. This guy, John Perkins, his job as an economic hitman was very specific. And he even had it described to him early on in his training, because he was first recruited by the National Security Agency, but eventually found himself working. He never worked for the government officially after that, as far as I can tell, or only briefly, because he was working for banks and corporations.
Yeah. Speaking of banks, don't you find it funny that a lot of these countries that we invade and destroy and we just occupy forever, don't you find it funny that, like, there's always a Rothschild central bank that pops up in those places, like, immediately afterwards? Gee, I wonder what the real reasons were for going into these countries and destabilizing them. Couldn't have been politically or financially motivated, right?
His actual job, his job was described as he's part of kind of a three layer of contact. Mm-hmm. And what he would do, well, at first, one of the biggest things he would do is, for the banks, he would go to a country such as, and let's be real specific here, Panama, as one of the countries he did this to. He did this to Panama. Basically, he would go into a country. They called him an economist and an economic analyst. And what he would do is he would go in and do economic estimates of what economic growth would look like in Panama and some of these other countries. I think he did it in other countries like Colombia and quite a few others too. Is he would do economic forecasts showing something along the lines of, if you give them this multi-billion-dollar loan to build new power power plants and infrastructure and roads, we forecast economic growth of something like 20% a year for 10 years, and then maybe down to 16 or 17 for the next few years, and maybe, at the end of 20 years, they will only be experiencing maybe as little as 10, 12% growth. And if you know anything at all, that's bullshit on its face, but that was the kind of thing he was doing routinely. And he admits it. It is like, you can manipulate the numbers to make that happen. Yeah, and it's all bogus. Anybody responsible, you should be able to look at that in the face. What? You really basically sustained average of 15% annual growth of a whole economy for 20 years? Really? And of course, it never happened. Well, why would they do that? They would do that to justify bank loans. Bank loans that the banks knew could never, and that the other governments knew could never be repaid because they could never have that kind of growth. I'm positive this is what happened in your country, Albrecht. It just happened to so many of them. The loans they can never pay back, which forces them to go into default. And now basically the banks or the CIA or whoever runs your country for their own purposes.
And here in America, there's something called the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And that's when the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, is, at least by constitutional standards, is an illegal entity and is not a legitimate part of the United States government in any way. And that's when that whole system was set up. And that's when we said goodbye to gold and silver, and that's when we started using their notes there, the paper money that isn't actually worth anything or has any actual monetary value behind it anymore. Because, like you said, it's a debt-based monetary system. That's pretty much what it is.
You mentioned economic warfare. I think a certain country is trying to imitate the Americans on this one. China. China's been giving away loans to every poor country nearby and abroad, and then they're gonna ask them to pay up the loans. It already happened to my country. It's already happened to Pakistan. It's already happening to African countries. It's already happening in Sri Lanka. Name a country the Chinese are also doing it.
Now, what's interesting of it when you read John Perkins is, of course, one of the reasons you're reading all this is he eventually got a conscience about it and started writing about it. And what he had to go through just to get it written is another story. But his job eventually went a little higher, and his job was actually to go and negotiate with the president of a country. Because obviously the locals, a lot of them eventually figured this out one way or the other. They either partially figure it out or they totally figure it out, right? And there are going to be people in the local economy and the local country who figured this out. And populists would get elected to throw these people out. And sometimes the country would go communist because the KGB and the communists would take advantage of it. But sometimes it was local, real grassroots resistance because they saw what was up. And they were like, we're not taking your loans. And his job then became to walk into the office of a president of one of these countries and say something along these lines as, sir, I have a briefcase for you here. There's $500 million in there. That's for you. You do anything you want with that. That's yours.
Yep, that's
I'm not done. I'm also letting you know that you and your family get a free plane ticket out of this country anytime you need it and lifetime sanctuary in another country if you go ahead and do these things that we want you to do. If you do not, I'll go ahead and leave here, and then you will be killed.
Yep,
I'm guessing that's what happened to Marcos in 1986.
In fact, he says his job was the economic hitman to come in and do this to you economically. If he failed, what came next was the jackals. And the jackals did things like run you over with a car or find some other excuse to assassinate you in some kind of plausibly deniable way. That's probably exactly what happened to Marcos. I can't say for sure, but would surprise me a bit. If the economic hitman fails, it's the jackals.
If I recall correctly, after the People Power Revolution of 1986, he fled to America. There he got sued by the victims of martial law and in Hawaii back in 1989, and then he died in 1989.
How about that? What you were just talking about there, Max.
Actually, I want to mention one last thing.
Yeah,
Marcos probably was what sometimes the economic hitman was the mop up. Even his rebellion wasn't all that organic, is all I'm saying. Because once a country's been taken over this way, then homegrown rebellion becomes a little different. But anyway, I don't know. I guess I'm rambling too much. By the way, stage 1 is the economic hitman. Stage 2 is the jackals, and I just wanted to get this out. Stage 3, military invasion. That is the standard playbook. And he was at the tip of that. And this book exposes all of it. So anyway, somebody else talk.
That's one of the biggest reasons why someone like Ron Paul was not elected for president back when he ran in 2008 and in 2012, because he wanted to completely abolish, not audit, but completely abolish the Federal Reserve in this country. And what you were just saying about people who, try to threaten their power, they're either, it seems, murdered, or they are completely demonized in the media. There's smear campaigns left and right about them, or there's total media blackouts about them, like what happened with Ron Paul. And this stuff is so, or at least it should be so blatantly obvious to Americans, or to pretty much anyone else in the world whose country is under the tyranny of such a debt-based monetary system like we are. But if somebody else wants to go ahead, because I feel like I've talked quite a bit tonight. Sorry.
I'm just worried about what's going to happen next. When Duterte approved being effectively China's vassal, he got a lot of money from China to develop the country. Unfortunately, a lot of these so-called promises for development are not happening. Even worse, the Philippines, I'm kind of afraid, because next thing's going to happen is that the Chinese from mainland China, not the Filipino Chinese, are going to invade the country, and then all sorts of things are going to happen. Heck, there's even
for sure.
There was even a time when the government was giving the Chinese workers a visa, something like a visa work permit, and a lot of Filipinos are pissed because, hey, these people are taking away our jobs.
Happens here all the time, because I'll tell you what is happening. This is absolutely what's happening. Everything that we just described happening to your country and to other countries in this book I've been talking about and such is being done to the United States now. I mean, it's kind of been slowly done to us for a long time, but I mean, it's like, no, they're doing it now. We've about reached the debt ceiling where we're going to have, where this is all going to come apart. They have intentionally destroyed a young generation of our young minds. They have intentionally destroyed a young generation from reproducing. They have intentionally made people completely dependent, lost, stupid, programmed, and cruel, actually. They've destroyed the culture. And they've done it on purpose, because it's all about control at the top. They don't care about the average American any more than they care about the average Filipino. I don't. We were the center of an empire, and it was really cool for a while. It was really cool for a while, but ultimately it was all on the backs of American taxpayers to benefit the wealthy.
Yep.
And now we've inherited the damage that, again, it's become popular to pick on baby boomers, and like they're the cause of all of it. But that disturbs me because A, they were seduced into it and programmed into it themselves. And B, because I think it's going to be used as as a justification for trying to euthanize them. I'm already hearing like the boomers are the cool generation that were so nice, and now young people can't stand them. And there's open talk. I mean, I was in a server full of atheists, and they were openly talking about killing boomers. You know, once they got past a certain age, they were no longer useful anyway, and they were really talking that way. And man, we are headed into some bad times. I'm going to get some water. I'll be back.
Yo, Eric, there's something I need to tell you. A lot of the things that you were saying about how people have no dads and all that, I also grew up in this type of environment as well. Like you, I grew up without a dad. And growing up without a dad is hell.
Yep, absolutely.
Like, there's no father figure for me. I grew up. And then there are people telling me that it's okay to not have a dad because reasons. God, this is insane.
Yeah, when a child lacks a stable and competent father figure in their lives, they're going to grow up with just a handful of all sorts of psychological and emotional issues. The family unit is so important to a child's upbringing and to their overall health. When you mess with that and you take out the father or you take out the mother or some kids grow up without like either parent, like that's so destructive. And it's sad because that cycle does usually continue because that son or daughter, they grow up and they become young adults, and they settle down eventually and they have a quote unquote family, but because they grew up in a broken and dysfunctional household, they're going to go their whole lives thinking that's okay and that's the way it should be, and so that's that's going to be passed on, so to speak, to their kids, and their household is going to be crazy and chaotic and unstable and all this, and it from generation to generation that cycle just continues, and it's so harmful and it's so self-destructive.
True, and it's not even helping that, at least for people like me and people outside of the U.S., a lot of us grew up with one or both parents working overseas. Imagine how bad it is that once dad or once mom or even both parents are working overseas, and then the kid is off to be raised by relatives, and then there's going to be a lot of problems from there on out. For example, there's a third type of the grandma who who spoils her grandkids because the parents are not around.
Yep. And that's also harmful because a grandmother can only, or grandparents in general, they can only do so much. Even if they were parents themselves at one point, like it's not the same as your actual parents raising you and being around you and guiding you in life. Because really, for the most part, it depends, I guess, on the person, the grandmother or grandfather. It depends on them, like how exhausted they are, and by that I mean, like, do they even want to raise another kid? Or because you could have like a lot of people, you could have really just like scumbag parents or scumbag grandparents, and they just don't care about you. And it's really like it's the roll of the dice when it comes to stuff like that. Oh, sorry, Max, go ahead.
No, you're right about all of that, and it's funny too because I think even young people who grew up without their fathers can see a lot of it now.
Yeah.
I really do. Although, again, I'm telling you straight up, when you're fatherless, you are more easily manipulated, and when you're a know-all atheist, you're actually the most manipulable of all.
Oh yeah, because there's a psychological connection there. Because where you either didn't have a father figure in your life, or if you did and he was abusive and all this, you kind of you project that image onto, like, if some, and it's just theism in general. If you tell someone, hey, there's a God and he actually cares about you and he loves you and all this and he wants the best for you in life, they're instantly going to go to, wait a minute, my father was a piece of shit, or my father was absent my whole life and didn't care about me. And they're going to project that onto God pretty much. And yeah. And so like and that turns into like either a straight up denial of the very existence of God, or just, if they don't deny God's existence, they're going to be very angry, and frustrated with him, and they're never going to have a stable relationship there, or which with people in general. And I think, because you did recommend it a few times in the past, there is a book on exactly that topic, isn't there? It's like The Faith of the Fatherless, I think.
Oh yeah, I bring it up all the time. Man, it makes some atheists really choke.
Max is joking on red pills over there.
I am. Yeah, sorry, I'm eating some food. I hadn't had dinner.
Look, man, I told you, you got to limit yourself to only 2 a day.
Faith of the Fatherless is a fantastic book by a research psychologist who, working with other researchers, just I don't know why it says by it because I already have it, but over 90% of atheists are male. It's a mostly male trait. Atheism runs higher in autistics than any other group. And I contend that, by the way, the Ritalin poisoned functionally become like autists in this way. They get taught materialist thinking, or it's easier to channel them into it. Over 90% of atheists are male. Over 90% of them are fatherless. Over 90%. It's an astonishing statistic. And it comes right from surveys of members of atheist groups. And self-selected sample groups and a whole bunch of other things. And when you're and for years they've known what father issues are, because your father gives you your sense of boundaries. He serves a certain protective role and also a pedagogical role to teach you things. Including physical boundaries even.
Yeah. Like your father's supposed to be like, you're like, he'll teach you like a sport, whether it's like baseball, football, whatever, and he'll teach it to you, and he'll play with you, and like you'll get hurt, right? And like he'll scrape up your knee or your elbow or whatever.
He'll be usually the one to say, "Walk it off, rub some dirt on it, keep going."
There's supposed to be this like toughening up, this natural toughening up of the child. And oh my goodness, okay, this is another area.
Well, let me say, by the way, it's a myth that dads don't toughen up their daughters, because mostly they do, just not quite as much. Mm-hmm. And the mothers help toughen up the daughters in other ways. But anyway, go ahead.
Oh yeah, definitely. This just reminded me of another area of like human nature in general, I guess, that have like that's changed so dramatically and has become so alien, and you guys can tell me if you've noticed this too, but oh my gosh, parents today, it seems like if their kid gets hurt, and I'm not talking about like hurt, I'm talking like a scraped knee or elbow, like we were just talking about, like they will flip out. They'll take them to like the emergency room for like
they are terrified.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And it's like
there's even a celebrity who does this.
It's like you need to let them like absorb that pain and walk it off, because that's what. Okay, here's what I did when I was a kid. I would ride my bike and I just sucked at it. I could not ride that thing for the life of me, but I kept going anyway because it was fun, and I was not afraid of adventure and taking risks, and so whatever. But so whenever I would fall, and I would fall a lot, like I would really mess myself up. here's what I did. I got up, I dusted myself off. I was like, well, that hurt. Let's try again. And I would get back on the bike and I'd start riding. Like, that's what I would do. And I would come home and, I'd be covered in bruises and scrapes and all this. And my mom would just kind of look at me like, of course she would like clean them for me and whatnot, because obviously that's the mom's role. That's her natural role, to be the caretaker and whatnot. But she wouldn't like baby me extensively. Like she'd be like, yeah, well, that's what you get. Like, so it's just this overprotection of kids today.
You know what I just decided we need to do? I know it's a sudden interruption, but I agree with you completely. What they used to call helicopter parenting. Oh my God, it's a disaster.
Yes.
Now
it's like Apache helicopter parenting.
I think what we're going to do, I really think we're going to do this. We now have 2 channels. We have the old channel, which is at least working. It's kind of a mess, but it's at least working. And we have this Red Pill Religion channel. The other one's called the Max Dean Esme Group. I think we're going to start having nightly informal streams on the Max Dean Esme Group, the old channel, and have this channel for the high premium, the more formal interviews, like we did with Ronnie Smith a couple hours ago. What do you guys think of that idea?
Good idea.
Yeah, sounds fun to me. That's when my brain is like most active, late at night. So that actually works.
Well, that's what there's something always going on. And it's like they're more informal on the Max Dean Esme channel. There's always something going on, even if we're just sitting around bullshitting. And on this channel, so this will be the last informal live stream on this channel. This channel will be for formal interviews and kind of more planned content. I think that's a really good idea I just had.
I agree.
Which I'm not sure how much longer I can stay up for this. I mean, I suppose I could just leave it over, but I should really go to bed within the next hour or so.
But yeah, there's just so much that has changed in like even the past like 5 to 10 years when it comes to like the family or children and teenagers and how how they think and how they behave. It's like, oh my goodness, it just gets progressively worse.
It does, and all the people I know now. I mean, it's really weird for me too, because I've been a creature of the internet since the '80s, basically.
Were you one of those kids that like when like the lights went out, you would like emerge from your cave and just like what's going on? All I know is the glow of this screen.
yeah, but I was weird and exotic. I was like, have you ever seen one of those '80s films of computer guys and hackers and stuff like that? That was my era. It totally was my era. And I was a computer nerd. And I was online before I wasn't on the internet till the late '80s, very early '90s, maybe 1990. But I was on bulletin boards and online services like CompuServe. I didn't actually use CompuServe. I used something called Genie and a few others and Delphi. But I mean, I was an online creature that early. I was an online addict that early. And I was an evangelist for it because I said, this is so awesome. Because it was a way for me to escape my shitty life.
Yeah.
But I was an exotic creature then, and now, hence, ironically, I'm in my 50s, and I can totally relate to people in their 20s and 30s who, like, got this happen to them, too, if you know what I mean. Like, except it became normalized in the culture.
Yeah, that was my reason for
I am odd among people my age.
That was exactly my reason for living on the internet, really just kind of becoming like an inherent part of it, because I had a shitty life, had a very shitty upbringing, and I was trying to escape that desperately. And so I found that online, whether it was in like computer games or random online chat rooms, whatever. I was like, oh, I get to download all of my insecurities and shortcomings and all that, and depression. Like I just get to zone out of all of that and just focus on the computer screen here and whatever the hell's going on here, even though that was a very unhealthy habit, obviously. But we all have our poison, pick your poison, as they say.
True.
Well, yeah.
There's another Micah Curtis because I remember in one of his videos he said that the internet is where all the broken people meet or something to that effect, and I'm all shit. This explains me. Yeah. I mean, this also describes me as well because, like you guys, I've also seen my share of bullshit, so I just go online instead.
Yep, that's pretty much most people. Like, it was crazy how many people my age or younger I was meeting when I was like a teenager, and I was going online and playing these games. I would just talk to them, and they would just like randomly come out and be like, "Yeah, my life just sucks, and that's why I'm on here so much."
I'm that
Wow.
guy.
Yeah. And it was just amazing. I'm like, every day I'm meeting at least one person who shares in these very similar hardships, and that's sort of when I just that's when it started to dawn, like, oh, this is a real actual problem. It's bigger than I think it is.
The feels be strong tonight, my friends.
And it's like kind of weird because at first you think it's like therapeutic, but like as you age, I guess, and as you mature and you wake up to these problems more and more, you're like, oh, this was never therapeutic. This was pretty much a bunch of people who were already struggling with like alcohol addiction, just getting around just a table together and just cheering each other on after every shot that they took. Like, that's that's not gonna fix the problem. That's just gonna exacerbate things.
I had a serious alcohol problem. Although I do still drink on occasion, I really have to watch myself. But I don't go to AA anymore. I used to, and yeah, when I was in my worst drinking days, I couldn't stop. I was screaming for help to stop, and I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
What was really weird is that up until a certain point, people told me they liked me better when I was drinking. Quite a few people did, including the wife at one point, although she shuddered to admit it. Everybody in her family, many of whom came to hate me, but now, I had a drinking problem. Why did I have a drinking problem? Was it just moral failure? Probably, yeah. But it was on top of a bunch of other moral failures, including, by the way, we see this in psychological circles and in the Bible too. The Bible says the sins of the fathers are visited onto the sons for the seventh generation. Yep. And that is actually a cause of consternation for some atheists who are like, you mean God is punishing me for something my ancestors did? Well, if you really want to understand it in these terms, and yeah, pretty much, because God is,
actually, if we think about that, God in a way isn't punishing us. What he's doing is saying, hey, like, he's laying out ground rules, like these very basic common sense moral rules, and he's like, if you do this, X will be the result and you will suffer the consequences. So what he's saying there is like, hey, you probably shouldn't do that, because that's the ramifications of those actions that you're doing, it's gonna have a ripple effect, and it's actually gonna cause a lot of other people around you and for generations to come a lot of harm. You're gonna hurt them too. So in a way, it's like, that's kind of our fault then, isn't it?
That's heavy.
Yeah, and even to get back to the boomer thing, I've gone this far. I look at it now and I realize World War. Not really, but bankers really were funding both sides of that, as far as I can see, and it was a desire to conflict by people more. And when you and actually World War II was really, I have always thought this, and I haven't changed my mind. World War II was really just the continuation of World War I, which was also a completely ludicrous bullshit war that certainly the United States should have never gotten involved in for any reason. We didn't have a good reason. We made it up. And uh, the whole of Europe fell apart in World War I, and that was due to meddling not just from communist forces, but by so-called capitalist forces too. The so-called capitalist forces being the bankers and the corporatists and the one world government type people. Well, yeah, because, you know, there's this whole idea that just wanting one worldism is purely a left-wing idea, and that's another fairy tale. You know, there is a nationalist coalition that is set to take over the European Union. And everybody who's anti-EU is currently cheering like mad, like, yay! Even Dr. Steve Turley, who I love, and I still go to his channel, is just such a booster for nationalism in Europe. And it is very exciting to watch. If you're watching now, Angela Merkel and her government, Theresa May and her government, what's recently happened in and what's going on with Macron and his government, all these last legs of holding up the globalist establishment in Europe are just about to fall, right? So all the anti-EU people are yay and waving a flag, and we're going to have nationalism, and we're going to have traditional culture, and it's going to be great. And by the way, I'm down with a lot of that, but you know, what's really happening here is that a coalition of nationalists are set to take over Europe. I don't believe for a second that they're going to get rid of the European Union. You'll just have a European Union constructed along nationalist lines. And then, of course, it's going to be a question of which strain of nationalism is going to get to be most predominant within the European Union federalized structure. I'm pretty sure that and I know Ted Schubat has been screaming about this on his channel, David Wolf, that, you know, we're going to have a new nationalist world order, right? And what will they do? And you know, nationalists like to go to war, for example. They're good at that. You know, I see. When the European Union was started, everybody said, no, 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 it would never be anything like a federalized United States of Europe. And they said, no, 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 that would never happen. And indeed, it did not happen. It became this centralized bureaucratic techno-state instead, right? But what happens? The nationalists are going to come in. And I predict for you now, the nationalists are going to come in, and they will create a United States of Europe, and that's what the European Union will be. So all the people in the yellow vests right now are probably going to hate me. I mean, I predict right now in 5 years they're going to be, why the fuck did I put that vest on? Maybe not. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic. And I really, because I've seen so much, but I'm like, I mean, I totally am on the yellow vest people's side, except I'm like, are you being played, and are you at all suspicious that you might be? I'm afraid to ask Steve Turley that question. Huh?
Is it pessimism or is it realism? Because you've seen some shit, man.
Dude, I'll tell you what, I am old and I really have seen shit. I tell people they don't believe the shit that I've done and seen, but I mean, I haven't had what you might call the meme there. I have not had what you would call a quote-unquote successful life for a wide variety of factors, but I've certainly had an interesting and colorful life with meeting all kinds of people, and I've traveled all over the country too, many, many times. And I always, usually, sometimes in the upper elite parts of society, well, the lower rungs of the elite, and you know, at the bottom a lot. I mean.
Yeah, minus the travel. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I've just seen decades of so many things. I look now and I'm like, yeah, the average person, there's still the average person I know doesn't see all this.
Yeah.
In real, I mean, they're starting to see more and more of it, though. It's coming to more and more people.
Yeah, the sort of lifting of the veil, so to speak. Yeah, minus the traveling all around the country, which I wish I could do. Yeah, pretty much the same. Very colorful, very interesting life. I'm 25, but I really do feel like I've lived a lot longer than that. Like it feels that way. I'm not physically older, obviously, but feels like I'm up there.
We've been deranged this way, increasingly deranged this way since like the TV generation, which was me, right? And maybe to a certain extent there were radio addicts before that, but TV addiction became an issue for my generation, which is Generation X, by the way. I'm not a boomer. I grew up idolizing boomers, which is far weirder a headspace. Your brain, your mind has been subject to more input since you were born than me, probably. And what I took in was probably an order of magnitude more than what is healthy or sane. In other words, you've had a lifetime of just nonstop data pumping into you that would let's say we believe in evolution. We don't want to debate it. We believe in evolution for now. You cannot possibly have evolved. We cannot possibly have evolved for our brains to take in as much information as it does on a daily basis now.
Right.
It's simply not. Fundamentally, this alters our brain structure. And it wouldn't even surprise me if in certain ways it makes you less us. Okay. In certain ways, this makes us less mature than previous generations, but in weird ways, it makes us more sophisticated. And it ages us. I think it ages us in a weird way, but just in a warped way.
Yeah, in some weird being around like radio wave frequencies all the time, especially when they're really high and constant. Obviously, that's very.
Oh, that too. Yeah, constant exposure to our constant exposure to microwave and radio frequency. Actually started when I was a kid. We actually have an abnormal amount of it since I was a kid, but that's ramping up too. What we're pumping through our air right now, it's terrifying.
With all like the 5G technology.
The 5G. I'm sorry, I don't want to hear. I'm paranoid. No, those are cancer-making machines.
Yeah.
5G. Oh boy.
Like there's I think you'd probably like him. He's a friend of mine. His name's Derek Brose. He has his own YouTube channel. He's a political activist, and he's been going to the court hearings in Texas where he lives, and bringing the 5G technology stuff to the attention of the local congressmen and women there, and he'll run through like a list of like health of detrimental health effects that this type of technology causes, and even that 4G and 3G were causing. And he'll straight up tell them all about it, and like he has a whole bunch of people listening to him, and they'll be like, we understand your concerns. We'll look into it, and this is obviously an important issue. We'll raise it at the next meeting, blah blah blah. And they don't, of course. So what he does is like he goes there. I think it's like either every week or every other week, and they think he like forgot about them, but he'll just come back and he'll keep saying the same thing. And he's like, all right, guess you guys forgot. I'm just gonna run you through this list again, gonna educate you further. Like, he'll just keep bothering them, and it's like he's hoping one day they'll eventually break down and actually start taking that stuff seriously. But that stuff is mostly financially motivated. It's like they're gonna set up the 5G technology regardless, I think, because there's just too much money in it. Like with the cell phone companies and whatnot, like they're making way too much money to care about the negative health effects that it has on us, I think.
I'm just going to make an announcement that we're going to do this. If I can work it out with Andrew Chatelates and Jean Baptiste and some of the other original, founders. But yeah, I think this makes perfect sense. We'll have an open stream every night, just about, and see what that gets for us. But we'll put it on the Max Colby, the Max group. We'll put it on that. And then we have, I think that's going to be community building and fun. And that also kind of reduces my stress, because I know we need regular content to kind of keep a community cohesive, but it's stressful streaming every night. But this would actually be pretty easy.
Yeah, the more laid back,
more or less have a stream every night. That's a good idea.
More laid back and informal discussions are, I find, usually better in terms of like getting like organizing your thoughts and getting them out there, because when it's like formal and it's like, you know, strict and you got to stay on topic and be like razor sharp about that stuff, that's like I think where the stress comes from, because you're always focusing on like, oh shit, like I can't derail, like I have to stay on, and you want to like branch off into 10 other different topics that are related somehow to the one you're talking about, but you can't, because you only have like an hour or whatever it is to talk about the subject and kind of fully explore it to the best of your ability anyway. So that's where the stress comes from. When it's laid back and chill, you can just go forever and talk about whatever and rant, and yeah, it's better that way.
I'm running this all up. You know what? I really do want to close this down, but I'm excited now. This feels like a good positive direction. I've been flailing like, what do I do to improve this channel? What do I do to improve visibility? What do I do to keep this community kind of, you know, interested in being part of what's going on? And I think this will work. All right, I'm going to close it out, but give us your thoughts. Jump in the Discord chat room if you haven't. If I was too yelly earlier, well, sorry, but I get real emotional at self-righteous Christians. I really, they actually drove me a little away from Christianity. So it's just like there's a fine line you have to have. There's a fine line you have to have. And for me, the line has always been when somebody says they have a problem and they're working on it, okay, that's moving in the right direction. And that's all I'm going to say. All right, so good night, everybody. God bless.